The Federal Reserve took its most aggressive step in nearly 30 years on Wednesday, raising its benchmark interest rate by 3/4 of a percentage point to combat rising inflation. This development sharply increased its projections for inflation going forward, while also curbing its estimates of economic growth for inflation. The central bank now sees its favored measure of inflation hitting 5.2% this year from 4.3% in March. Although the core rate, excluding food and energy costs, pegged at 4.3%, up only 0.2%, but 0.2 points. However, the Fed continued to paint a picture of an economy strong enough to withstand its planned series of rate hikes, which will take the federal funds rate, at which banks can borrow overnight, to 3.4%, up from 1.9% back in its March dot plot. Well, I introduced him earlier, joining me live in our Lagos studio to understand this. And of course, we'll definitely touch on what it means for Nigeria's economy. He is a deputy president of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Gabriel Idausa. Thank you so much for your time. It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you.
It's like it's a time of rate hikes everywhere. The US had theirs yesterday, and today the EU is also raising rates. What do you think about this first before we now maybe go to some specifics around these issues?
Well, it just shows the whole world is one organic economy. You can't build boundaries between economies. Once there's a factor that is driving the process, it just makes nonsense of all the borders and it just goes around the world. And so that's what we're seeing. The European Central Bank, then America, then, of course, England. You're going to see it all over the world. The underlying reason is there, so nobody can Nigeria and other countries are already affected. The African Union have come out to say they are victims, quote unquote, of the Ukraine war. But that's the direct effect of what the war has created around the world.
This looks like this recession might be inevitable. They're saying that there might be a global recession. Do you think that might happen?
Not might, will happen. The only thing you want to use to reverse it is to end the Ukraine war and begin to do damage control from the damage already done. Because the entire Western economy are insisting on a total boycott of Russian oil and gas and a whole lot of sanctions. And they are not backing out from those sanctions anytime soon. And the rate hikes you are seeing, the inflation, the depression, are the direct result of those actions. And politically, it's not really possible for the Western countries to now reverse their position and take away those sanctions when the war is still in the middle of its course. So it's a self-inflicted situation by the fact that there was a war and the Western countries decided to react to it in this manner. So it's not going away until the decisions are made to reverse, all those.
There will be higher borrowing cost, of course, when this is totally instituted for mortgages, credit cards, and other loans. Now, what kind of life do you think people will live before we go to energy costs and all of that, which is also almost double at the moment? What impact would it also have even on the economy of these countries?
You're already seeing a gradual decline in quality of life. The standard of living is badly impacted. People can no longer afford a lot of things they can afford. This is the summer period where typically in Europe, everybody's on holidays doing long road trips. Nobody can talk about road trips now with gasoline prices about 2.5 times their prices. So everyone is going back to standards of living that are much lower than what they are used to. And it's going to continue because there is no real time frame. It's an event that does not have, a fixed agenda. Nobody wants to end the war anytime soon. Both sides don't want to end the war. And so the decline in the standard of living you are seeing across the world, the inflation you are seeing across the world, last seen 40 years ago. The inflation in America now, 8.6, was last seen 40 years ago. So it's a different economy that a lot of young adults have not seen in their lives. In Europe, to have inflation about 2 to 3% has not happened in the Western world for almost 3 decades. So this is a new economy that they are not used to. They don't have a hang on it other than raise hike interest rates in the hope of slowing down the inflation. But the real cause of the inflation is the war. So
it might not really work. Like it's not working over here too.
So it's like you are the Federal Reserve. Everybody is trying to climb a slippery wall. You are trying to climb and say you hike, and the same government, American government, yesterday announced $1 billion additional support to the Ukraine war, which is coming right out of the budget for the people of America that is supposed to support their standard of living. So you don't want to take Russian oil, so the price of oil goes up. The resources you have, you are putting it into the war, and so it's a double whammy. You are allowing inflation to go up.
Yeah.
You are using resources that is meant for basic, normal social services in these Western countries and putting in the war efforts. So that's where we find ourselves.
Let's look at commodity prices now. Since when this war started, particularly the focus will be on wheat, fertilizer, and all of that, which is also hitting us hard here in Nigeria. The NSIA came out some time to say they were expecting some supply from a particular country sometime 2-3 weeks ago. But I'm looking at that and the impact on bread, of course, and all that we eat here. Moving on, will this not get worse than we are seeing it? It's like there is more for us to meet up as we move on.
Well, Russia has found a way to export their wheat. Ukraine has found a way to export wheat through Romania and Poland. So we expect that supplies will start to come out and moderate the direct increase in prices we are seeing in grains. Hopefully that process works and we begin to see moderation. The inflation will continue, but the rate of inflation might slow down as they are finding ways of solving the problem. But what we now know, for example, is that this year's production of wheat and other grains in Ukraine will be about 40% of the capacity before the war. So even if there is a channel to distribute, what they can produce this year is about 40% because the war, of course, has destroyed a lot of facilities. So the demand gap is going to be there for at least a year or more, depending on where the war comes to an end. So the price increases you are seeing in grains around the world are going to be there easily another 1 year, assuming the war even ends in about 6 months from now. But if the war goes on for another 1 year, then you have 2 to 3 years to get out of it.
I want to bring it down home. Now you see the central bank bringing farmers together and investing more money, planting more of wheat, and I think looking inwards at this time. Do you think that can help bridge that gap? And one thing, we're used to the taste. That's what I heard from professionals saying that the issue is not even just the wheat. It's about the taste that we are used to. What happened to the cassava bread at a time where we had that?
Well, you can afford taste, one, when you have the product, and you can afford the price.
That's true. When you have no choice, you have to stick to what you see.
So this business of you are used to the taste and whatever
doesn't come in.
It's because you have it.
But it's a
you
choice.
can find it to buy and you can afford it. But once you remove those two things, you have to live with what. But in Nigeria, it's more complicated in the sense that even when the central bank injects funds into the sector, are the farmers able to go to farm? Is there security in our farmlands across the country for farmers to go to farm? The answer clearly is that it is significantly reduced. The amount of acreage that farmers can safely farm in Nigeria is vastly reduced across anything from 20 to 25 states, where the security situation has reached a stage where farmers are just simply afraid to go to farm because of threat to their lives. So whatever injection of funding that comes from CBN now is not going to translate directly into a significant increase in food production unless the security situation is addressed. So that's a specific country situation that we need to deal with. Safety in our farmlands. Otherwise, whatever we do there is not, our local food price inflation. It's not all imported. It's not because we are importing expensive food. It's also because we are not able to farm anything close to 50, in fact, less than 50% of the farmland that we would normally farm in Nigeria. So in almost every state, in maybe all the northern states and a lot of the north central states, and even parts of the southeastern states now, going to farm is a matter of life and death. The risk to life is so high that farmers, a lot of farmers you talk to just don't farm anymore. Those who farm very close to the house, very little farms around the house, so they can run into the house and call people when there are problems. So that's a country-specific issue that we need to. There's no economics to that. It is security. It's security that will resolve that problem. So that inflation that is caused by a very significant fall in food production, it's hardcore. It's going to be there until the security situation is improved. There's no economic aspect to that.
For a country that borrows like Nigeria, we know what our debt is looking like, how we borrow both locally and domestically. I'm also looking at what impact this would have on borrowing for a country like Nigeria.
Well, we have to keep borrowing, unfortunately, because for what we've just said, if you don't produce enough from your own farms that you are blessed with, and you still have 200 million people to feed, you need petroleum products for these people. We don't produce petroleum products. So we have to borrow to finance these things. And because we have so many states where economic activity is not possible because of security, a lot of the companies, enterprises in those places are not working fully. They are not generating enough income to pay taxes. So our tax revenues are also coming down. So government revenues are coming down. So the only way they can survive as government itself is now to borrow. So you borrow to keep the government running, borrow to pay previous loans. So we are actually borrowing to service loans. We are not, our revenues are not enough to run the government. If you look at the budget, even before the additional 4 trillion for the new level of petroleum subsidy, we already had a deficit of about 6 trillion before the addition of the 4 trillion. That 4 trillion has turned out to be a very low estimate because almost every day we see the price of crude oil going up. And anytime crude oil price goes up, our subsidy, of course, moves.
And we are not able to take advantage of that because of all theft and vandalism and all that happens in our country. For a chairman of someone like Tony Lumelu to come out to say what is happening in that sector, that means a lot is really happening. That's also something that is sad.
Yeah, so you have all these country-specific issues that Nigeria is dealing with. Countries like Saudi Arabia, like Kuwait, they are making a killing, a fortune from the price of petroleum, of crude oil. But in Nigeria, we can't even produce the 1.8 million barrels because vandalism and everything has reduced our production sometime to less than 1 million barrels per day. We are below Angola now, and at a period where we should be getting a revenue boom from the price of crude oil. So we are not producing enough. We are not producing refined products, so we are importing refined products. When we have trillions and trillions of crude oil under the ground, we have refineries that should produce for us, they are not producing. So we just keep on, having all these issues from security to this, to that. So that's where we find ourselves.
They're all tied together one way or the other. I'll ask you this question directly. Are you a fan of subsidy? Or are you one of those that want subsidy removed?
It is not a question of being a fan or no fan.
I like to just ask that way because it's been topical.
The point is that if Nigeria were a human being and it has a specific disease, let's say it has malaria, then it's not a question, are you a fan of anti-malaria or not? You just take the anti-malaria.
So that you get well.
We cannot as a country sustain this subsidy. Everyone, except a few people perhaps in the trade union and a few civil society people, who are against removal of subsidy. Everyone in government, the Minister of Finance, the Chief Executive of NNPC, everybody in government, apart from the few politicians that are still holding on to it, have said it is not sustainable. It is simply not sustainable. The people in the business, the oil companies, because you can't give what you don't have. So it's not a surprise that every month we go a borrowing just to keep the government running. Government as an enterprise cannot fold up. If this government was a private enterprise, it would have closed up by now. So we have to remove subsidy, whether we like it or we don't like it. At some point, we have to remove it. It depends on what that point will be.
But I think the fallout of that action is what Nigerians are really concerned about. Not really taking out that something. They really need to understand that if it is taken, what comes in for the masses. You know, a lot of calculations, a lot of theories have gone on with regards to subsidy. But before we stay so long on that, I'm just worried about how we can manage so that we don't keep borrowing at this time where rates are high. So maybe the sincerity from government is something that is also very important, and government sees that the people see that government is sincere and open to this course of subsidy removal and its impact on us. Do you think maybe that would help, even for the labor unions to understand what really the issues are?
Well, the labor unions are human beings. All you need is to have a roadmap.
Yeah.
If we take out 4 trillion from subsidy, this 4 trillion, this is where we are going to put it. We are going to reduce school fees. We are going to reduce hospital bills. We are going to provide public transport. We are going to do all the things that impact on the life of Nigerians. The 4 trillion is just moving from here to here. But the benefit of removing it, for example, is that we will no longer subsidize out of that 6 trillion. 30% of that 6 trillion, 4 to 6 trillion, is subsidizing our neighbors' economies. Because we import petroleum products and they immediately cross the border to all those countries. So we will stop that subsidizing of our neighbors. We will put money where they ought to be, in our universities, in our secondary schools, in our hospitals, in our roads. And then you and I will consume the level of petrol that you can afford. If I have a car and I find I can't drive it Monday to Sunday because of the price of petrol, I will decide to use it on a weekend and go by public transport. It has happened all over the world where petroleum subsidies were removed. The people just change their habits. Today, you have 2,000 cars on a road on Third Mainland Bridge. Each car has one person or two persons. In countries where subsidies were removed, you don't see that. People pull together. They do carpooling because it doesn't make sense for me to pay $5 per gallon now in America and be driving myself alone in a car. And that is what we need to understand in Nigeria. Removing subsidy is not the end of life. It's going to mean a change of habits.
Indeed. I think that conversation, we'll keep talking about it. So do you see, so we'll continue to see all of this kind of tightening and this increase in reserves as we move on to, of course, the end of the year, because it seems like that's the pace. Everyone is following that pace. So as the war continues, we'll continue to see this.
Surely. I think the important thing is to live with the reality that this is June. If you stop the war now, it will take the rest of this year to undo all the damage. Nobody is willing to stop the war. So it's an open-ended situation. We have to wait and see until how and if the war ends before you can make any speculations as to when all this inflation and everything that is resulting from the war can change. There's no basis for any forecast.
We would always be here to analyze them, looking at the realities on ground. Thank you so much. Interesting conversation too, as usual. There is the Deputy President at the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry there, Mr. Gabriel Dausa. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this.
Thank you.